Hi, everybody. Today is Monday, June 2nd, 2025, and our friend Paul Carrick Roberts is back with us. Welcome back.
Thank you, Nima.
Paul, I wanted to focus on the Middle East, but before going to the Middle East and what's going on there, let's talk about the surprising attack on Russians nuclear bombers, and not just on nuclear bombers. We had attacks on bridges in the Kursk and the other, if I'm not Bryansk, something like that. Two other regions were attacked. The bridges were attacked, civilian infrastructures. But the most important one was in the uh, the attack on the nuclear bombers. Your take on what has happened?
Well, it seems quite amazing. Um, the reports that I saw said that this plan had been going on for 15 months. They worked 15 months developing this plan, and it consisted of having trucks, the top of which would roll up or retract, and that Ukraine had managed to deliver a quantity of these trucks in four or more locations of Russia, including Siberia. And they were able to hit four military air bases. Well, it just sort of makes you wonder how there could be trucks carrying drones. How did they get into Russia from Ukraine? Um, Particularly as the whole front is a war front. um, how can they drive thousands of kilometers in Russia and never be stopped or noticed? Or the whole thing seems implausible. But it appears the attack did happen. And some news reports are claiming that Russia lost one third of its nuclear bombers, which was a serious attack. And so, what are the consequences? Well, again, so far, it seems that none. Putin's not doing anything. Um, the ever widening war is now wider. Maybe the Kremlin will never react. But it seems to me the war is so wide now that it's bound to break out in a full-fledged way. And I don't see how Russia can continue to accept these kinds of humiliations. And I don't understand why the Kremlin went to the peace talks this morning after being attacked in this way. What? So it's perplexing, the whole Russian behavior. It's almost like they're not involved. So, or it's like they'll accept anything rather than win the war. I thought that the Kremlin had had enough, and that their real agenda is not to end the war, is to get a great power agreement that ends the conflict between East and West. Um, but they'll never get that with the way that they accept attack after attack and still have constraints on how they fight. So, and the fact that such a extraordinary attack, so unusual. Uh, just try to imagine enemy forces moving around your country, setting up so they can attack four of your important airfields, including the location of your strategic nuclear bombers, that implies that Russia is hasn't any security system. They don't know what's going on in their own country. And um, I saw the English language Russian press focusing on heroic actions by Russian people who tried to stop the drone attack and so on. Well, where was the Russian military? Where was the Russian intelligence service? It doesn't make any sense to me. Um, but I think Ukraine will use this success to keep Europe's support. They'll say, look what we did to them. We haven't lost this war. And it will booster the European elements that want to continue supporting Ukraine and to continue the war. And I still think Trump just wants to get America out of it. But I think that this is a Ukrainian success that's rather dramatic, and it will help them keep support for continuing the conflict. So the war just ever widens. It's now gone this big, and the way Putin refuses to actually use sufficient force to end the conflict, we'll have more such incidents.
You mentioned Vladimir Putin, but how about Donald Trump himself and his administration? Do they really believe that they want something? They want a Ukrainian settlement. They want a bigger agenda when it comes to Russia. Do they have any sort of picture in their mind when it comes to Russia? One part of this story is Russia, but the other part is the United States and the grand strategy on the part of the Trump administration.
Well, the whole Ukrainian conflict is an American operation. It was a product of the neoconservatives who overthrew the Ukrainian government and set all this in motion. And the purpose of the neoconservative policymakers was to destabilize Russia. They want to continue asserting American hegemony. And so Russia and China are in the way. And so the neoconservative policymakers are very interested in destabilizing both countries. And so that's the agenda of the foreign policy, American foreign policy community. The American conservatives are all part of that. I saw this morning on Johnson's Russia list that one of the conservative magazines is urging Trump to stand strong against Putin and so on. And for the American conservatives, it's all a matter of standing up against the Reds. And they can't see anything else. That's the limit of their comprehension. And so between the conservatives who are all prepared to go to war, and you ask them why, and they don't really know. It's just, and then the neoconservatives, they want to break up any chance of a great power agreement because that implies American or Western acceptance of Russia and as an equal or something closer to an equal than currently. And so that's not consistent with American hegemony. Now, Trump himself, I think I originally thought he wanted to end the wars and focus on the domestic agenda. Now I tend to think he wants to withdraw from this war and focus on China and maybe Iran, and and understands that he can't focus on three enemies at once. And so withdrawing from the Ukrainian conflict and leaving it up to the Europeans is a way of Washington sequencing its conflicts and putting them on a level that it can manage them. So I still think that's probably what is behind Trump. His Secretary of State explained that to a Senate committee a couple of weeks ago, and that he explained it exactly the way I've explained it on your program. So I think that's it. I don't think the American foreign policy community has the imagination to think about a great power agreement. Uh, this this requires more imagination, more thought than they're capable of, and they're still in their narrative that Russia has to be contained and American hegemony has to be maintained. And I don't think they can see beyond that, Nima. There's no sign of it in the foreign policy literature. You know, I get the Johnson Russia list and I scan it, and I never see anything that is realistic. It's all, it reminds me of the kind of arguments of 50, 60 years ago that the Russian threat, and we have to do whatever is necessary. And it's all in military terms. So I'm not hopeful anything positive is going to happen. And it seems that nothing really causes Putin to realize he's got to end this conflict. I had kind of thought that he would have come to his senses and see that if he drives NATO out of Ukraine, it will prove that NATO can be defeated. And once that's proven, Europe will be less likely to get in a situation where the Russians decide to drive the Germans out of Germany and the French out of France. And that could lead to a great power agreement. But as weak as Putin comes across, he's never going to get one. You can't get an agreement like that without people being fearful of you and wanting to protect themselves, and so that they have the same incentive in a mutual security pact that you have. Well, right now, it's the Russians who feel threatened by all of this. It's not NATO that feels threatened by Russia. And I think that's because of the way Putin has conducted this conflict and the kind of weak response. I mean, maybe they'll come up with a strong response. As far as I can tell, there's not been a strong Russian response to the terror attacks on the ground against the two bridges, which were quite clever. They got one of the bridges when a passenger train was going over it with 300 or 400 people on it. There was substantial casualties. And the other attack, a train was going there and the bridge collapsed on the train. So those people were there in place, or something was in place to know when to detonate the blast. Um, so where's the security? And since it's a war front, how do trucks full of drones just drive off into Russia? Where'd they come from? If they came from a Polish border or something, I mean, it seems to be very risky for Poland. So I don't know what to make of it, except that it's a never-ending war and an ever-widening war, and it just keeps getting wider. And before long, It's a general war, a large-scale general war. Um, so today, the English Prime Minister and the Defense Minister in England both say we're preparing for war with Russia. We're preparing now. Why? What, what does England think? How is it going to go to war with Russia? It can't go to war with Russia. It's nonsensical. They haven't the ability. It's a tiny little place compared to Russia. They haven't the weapon systems. So I don't know what to make of these. I mean, perhaps the whole world's gone insane. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe they're just crazy people. That's entirely possible.
Paul, we know that Elon Musk was one of the important characters in the Trump administration, who, even during the Biden administration, who was forced to provide Ukrainians with a internet connection. And but he wasn't, whenever he was putting something about the war in Ukraine, he wasn't that much on the side of Ukrainians. He was totally against the war in Ukraine. He didn't want it to be he didn't want the United States to be part of the war. When it comes to the Middle East, he was the very first person to talk with the Iranian ambassador in New York. He talked with him to start these sort of negotiations between the United States and Iran. With China, we know that he was so much clear that he doesn't want anything militarily with China. He wasn't interested in. Right now, he's out of the scene. He's not in the picture. He's not in the administration anymore. He was involved in Doge. Doge tried many things to help the administration in the United States. One of them was U.S. aid, which was so much important when it comes to the cutting the spending on the part of the administration. How do you see what are the effects, what are the influences coming out of this departure from the government, Elon Musk's departure from the government?
Well, he was a strong figure and was often seen in the Oval Office with Trump, even during Trump's interviews with his own government and with the press. So uh, I think Trump found in Musk's personality and the strength of it a very strong read, a very strong support. And I think Trump will miss that kind of support. Um, and among his crowd, his crew, there are differences of opinion about China, Iran, and Ukraine, and some of them are see that Russia has a point in this, and others don't. And some see that Iran has a point, and others don't. And some don't quite understand what we hope to achieve in conflict with China. And others think that the only thing is important is to have the conflict. It's not quite clear what they think will come out of it. And so we have a situation that without strong presence, it can just sort of end up in chaos. And Trump is the only source of strength. He can't say, Elon, what do you think about all this? If Elon's not there. And so who will he ask? And I think that it's all perfectly capable of just degenerating into a mess. And there's no agenda except survival, political survival, or trying to see your way clear to something that you could do that would be successful. The way it's continuing, uh, putting pressure on the Russians to hold talks with Zelensky. What for? I mean, the only viable talks are Trump and Putin, and they're not happening. And I don't think it will. And so I'm not hopeful about this Ukrainian thing. And and again, I think Putin. This is Putin's mess. This is this is due to Putin's inability to realize he had to win that conflict very quickly before the entire West got involved, and it widened and widened until it spirals out of control. And that's where it's headed. And I'm each time that something happens that was never supposed to happen, I'm amazed that there's no Russian response of any importance. And so they'll keep happening. These things will keep happening. And of course, part of the Western press will make it look like Ukraine is on a comeback and is winning again.
Paul, with Elon Musk, do you think that Donald Trump, he said recently he had an interview about the new bill on which Donald Trump explained as big and beautiful. And he said it cannot be big and beautiful. It can be big or beautiful, not both of them at the same time. How is that a real concern? Is that a major difference between Elon Musk and his sort of concept about the government and the people around Donald Trump? I don't know if Donald Trump uh, was that much connected with Elon Musk as we saw when the government started. It seems as time went by, the two were somehow differences were coming to the surface. That's why Elon Musk finally decided to get out of the government.
Well, the media would do everything possible to create the appearance of differences, whether they're there or not.
They
And I
did a
mean,
lot, by the way. They did a lot.
they what?
The media did a lot. They did
Yeah,
everything to separate the
yeah,
two.
yeah, they did. So the differences could be due to the success of the media in creating perceptions. I think the problem Musk was facing was that he is the chairman and CEO of several very large companies. Uh, I think all of them are public companies. He has a controlling interest, but he has a board of directors, and I think and they probably don't all have the same political views because they probably were chosen for what they might know or might not know about the business. And so I think what Musk was experiencing was some sort of pressures from his boards or members of his boards. Hey, you're supposed to be running these companies, maybe from shareholders. I think during this time, one of his companies had a reverse of some sort. I forget what it was, maybe Tesla. Um, um, no doubt, enemies were looking for some way to bring lawsuits, some ways of harassing him. And he probably just found it very expensive to have the kinds of fiduciary responsibility he has. I mean, we're talking about huge sums of money and extremely large companies. That's right. One of his rocket company, one of the rockets failed, and so things started not going well. And I think that he had to think about that. He wasn't elected president. He's the president and CEO of big, powerful companies, and um, this was working against him. There are too many ways people could say, well, why aren't you running the company? Look what's happened, and so on. And so I think that's probably the main thing affecting Musk, because he wasn't having an easy time. Everybody was making accusations and assertions, and everything he did that was positive was portrayed by the media as negative. And you start looking at it, and he says, well, look here, I'm trying to help them, and they're trying to destroy me. Maybe I better go back to my companies and make another $100 billion or whatever. And uh, so I think that's probably what that is, Nima. It's he was taking on an awful lot.
What surprises me, Paul, on the part of the Trump himself is why did he decide to let the two parties, Ukrainians and Russians, talk directly to each other without the United States being part of the negotiation? Because as you've mentioned many times, the main party in the conflict is the United States, not even Ukraine or Europe. Because if we assume those talks in 2022, Zelensky was still interested in having some sort of agreement with the Russians in 2022 because he had a future ahead. Right now, he doesn't have a future ahead of him. He doesn't have any picture because the future, whatever comes, a Ukrainian settlement, whatever comes out of these sort of discussions that are happening right now, is not going to be good for Zelensky himself and his administration. They're going to get out of the government. They're going to hand it to other administration, to other president, to another president that comes to power. I was wondering why did the Trump administration decide to let them negotiate, in which we know the intentions on their part is not getting any sort of agreement.
Yeah, that's a good question. And the even better one is, why did Putin agree? Why did Putin agree to negotiate with Zelensky when he knows he's at war with the United States and NATO? To me, that's the real mystery, is why did Putin agree? Um, these negotiations can't go anywhere. And Zelensky really, even Putin himself has said several times that how can he negotiate with Zelensky? He's not even the head of government. His term ran out some time ago. He's not even a member of the Ukrainian government. So who is he negotiating with? And Putin has made this point. And yet the Russians are going to negotiate with Zelensky. It's nonsensical. I don't think we can explain it according to my hypothesis that Putin wanted to use peace negotiations to reach a much broader agreement. Well, that, of course, requires that he's negotiating with the President of the United States. And this hasn't happened. And Putin has said he's willing to negotiate with Trump. But it seems like what their phone call was really about was Trump getting Putin's agreement to negotiate with Zelensky. Well, Putin should say no. I'll talk to you. We have to work this out, you and I. And at least that lets him bring the issue up that he wants to bring up, that this whole problem is due to the absence of a great power agreement, the absence of a mutual security agreement, what Lavrov and I tried to get out of the Biden regime in the winter of 2021, 2022. If Biden had given us this, there'd be no conflict in Ukraine. And you say it's not your war, it's not my war either. It's Washington's war. And that's what we have to deal with. And that's what Putin should have told him. And I have no idea what Putin thinks is going to be accomplished with a bunch of Russians and a bunch of Ukrainians talking across a conference table. It's not Putin talking to Zelensky. I don't think either one of them are there. Putin's not there. Zelensky's not there. It's and negotiators, they like things to go on forever. It keeps them in the limelight, makes them important, it gives them something to do. Um, they make new contacts.
Yeah, all they did so far is just exchanging prisoners, nothing more than that.
Yeah. What can they do? I mean, they can't negotiate a great power agreement. They can't negotiate a mutual security agreement. And Zelensky has said over and over he won't do any such thing. And the real question is, why is Zelensky there? His term's over. How do you stay in office when your term's expired? And what is your authority to negotiate anything? And if you sign something, what does it mean, anything? He's not the president. So how can he sign an agreement? And what would the agreement mean? And so the whole thing is nonsensical. It makes no sense to me. And I don't see I can possibly go anywhere. I don't even know what the purpose of it is. And it's really surprising that Putin goes along with this foolishness. It just makes him look more foolish. That doesn't help the case. You see, there's one thing that Churchill and Roosevelt, they never could say that Stalin looked foolish. And when Stalin finally recovered from the onslaught of the surprise blitzkrieg across the Russian front, he became a formidable enemy and destroyed the German army. And the United States had almost nothing to do with that war. It was over with before we ever got in it. So I think we went in for the last 6 months or something, when Germany's already completely defeated. Well, they had to take Stalin seriously, but they're not having to take Putin seriously because he never does anything that seems to be serious.
Paul, how long does it take for Donald Trump to understand that he's missing his opportunity to make changes in the foreign policy of the United States? If we assume they're approaching to 5 months and then 6 months of this administration, is that the golden time for the administration to change the narrative, to change the rhetoric in Washington? Because right now they send a proposal on the nuclear program in Iran, and Iran says that this proposal is not balanced, and they're failing to meet Tehran's core demands. I would wonder what is the gain on the part of Donald Trump himself and his administration. In Ukraine, everything, as time goes by, everything is getting much more complicated. And with Iran, I don't see anything coming. And how, with the tariffs, we know what has happened. What are they doing? What are they trying to achieve in this administration?
I don't know. I don't think they know. There are different forces. The neoconservatives are somewhat discredited, but they are still influential. And their policy remains the same, hegemony, American hegemony. And the conservatives, not the neoconservatives, just the ordinary American run-of-the-mill conservative, they're always for standing up to enemies. And if you ask them, well, why is Russia an enemy? They just, well, they're our enemies. That's the answer you get. They don't know why they're our enemies. They're just used to it. It goes back to the Cold War last century. So there's not thought. And in any administration, there are a variety of policymakers. And some are trying to help the president, and some have their own agendas. And some are serving one set of clients, some serving another set of clients. And so it's all a jockeying around situation. And all of them are trying to use the media. And no doubt at some point in this process, the American establishment is letting Trump know that this isn't going to work and he needs to do something else, which means what they want done. And that may fit in with a majority of the policymakers. It may not. It may introduce some new thing into the chaos so that it gets more chaotic. You see, I was caught up in all of that in economic policy. It was clear what the president wanted. I clearly represented what he wanted, but there were a whole bunch of other people in powerful positions that didn't want that. So I didn't spend any time fighting Democrats. I was fighting Republicans in the Reagan administration. And I happened to win, but in the short term. There's no long-term victories. So it's hard for people to understand the reality. I would be in meetings critical about what the economic policy is. And there were opponents inside the administration to the Reagan's policy. Jim Baker, the chief of staff, was an opponent. David Stockman, the budget chief, and the treasurer was on the president's side. And we would, their differences couldn't be resolved, so it would go up to the White House, and in comes the president's men, and the president and his men say, we agree with the treasury, and get up and leave the room. And Jim Baker would turn to Secretary Reagan, the Treasury Secretary, and say, Don, can't the Treasury make a better case? You didn't hear what the president said. Well, this is ordinary. It's just the way things go. The Republican establishment, which was organized around George Herbert Walker Bush, the former CIA director, was scared to death of deficits. And so they were opposed to the president's supply-side program because they were going to cut the tax rates. And they said, oh, the deficit will get bigger, we'll be destroyed. And we would try to explain to them, no, that's not what's going to happen. This is a new policy. This supply-side policy is not a Keynesian macro dynamics. It's but the deficit. So that was the limit of their comprehension. Deficit. We have to stop this. Reagan will destroy us with deficit. And so get the president's bill out of his administration so Congress could vote on it. No, Congress. The trouble wasn't with the Democrats. It was with the establishment Republicans. I'm scared to death of the deficit. Well, I tell this story just to show you this is the sort of thing that goes on, and you're asking me about it, and you really can't understand it without an example to see. And I'm sure there's something going on like that in this struggle about policy. Um, I don't think it's reached the point yet that it's a struggle there. And the pot's getting all stirred, and people are looking for their place in the swirl that they can direct in their direction. And if you haven't lived through it, you can't comprehend it. And it's difficult to explain, but that's in effect what I think is going on about the foreign policy. Um, and the Iranian complaint is just as legitimate as Putin's. We have to address the core issue. The core issue is not the conflict in Donbass.
Yeah.
And the Iranians are right. The core issue is not us providing nuclear power. It's not the core issue. Uh, why is this so important to you? Let's deal with the core issue. And I still don't know what the Trump administration or the people in Washington think the core issue is with China or what they can do about it. I don't think they know what the core issue is. We've talked before that it's the trade deficit with China is not China's fault. It's the fault of the American corporations that offshored their production for American markets to China. Those products come in as imports and run up the trade deficit. And not that it really matters, as long as the dollar is the world reserve currency. But so I don't really know why they're so upset about China. I have no idea why the Biden people were trying to cause conflict between Taiwan and China. No, we long ago wrote off Taiwan with the one China policy. Took China out of the Security Council. I took Taiwan out of the Security Council and put China in. That was settled in the Nixon regime back in the early 1970s. So why is this a problem now? Where does it come from again? I mean, so I don't know what this is all about. Um, uh, Maybe it's just the military security complex ensuring that it has enemies that the American people are willing to spend untold hundreds of billions arming against. That the military security complex needs enemies and paints them even when they don't exist. And that may be what all this is. They're not going to give up the armaments profits. And so they don't really want peace. It doesn't mean they want a nuclear war, but they want opponents. They want strong, threatening opponents. That's the business success model for the military security complex. Without strong, dangerous opponents that can be presented as threatening, uh, there's no business model for the armaments industry. For the unaccountability of the CIA's covert operations. So you can't overlook those as really the controlling, determining issues. And they, of course, override whatever the opinions of the various players in the scenario in Washington.
Paul, to wrap up this session, in your opinion, with as time goes by and Trump administration is getting more experience, is getting more mature, do you think that these people who are in favor of new conflicts, the neocon version of the establishment in representatives in the Trump administration, which I would consider Rubio and these people who are on the part of the establishment, these are getting stronger, or we're going to see JD Vance and the people who are much of reason, who are much more against, mm, much more in line with what Donald Trump wanted before coming to power, going to get stronger? Who's going to win in the Trump administration?
Oh, I don't know. Um, I did see this morning a poll of American people show the vast majority of them support war with Iran in order to prevent Iran from having nuclear weapons. So the propaganda has succeeded with the public. Um, I didn't have a chance to read more than the headlines, but that's what the headlines said, that the polls show the Americans would go to war with Iran to prevent them having nuclear weapons. So the American people are hardly well informed, and they've been taught that all Muslims are enemies ever since 9/11. They still think this was a Muslim operation against America. And so uh, these are the people who are voting for Trump. So how much support is it for peace? None.
Thank you so much, Paul, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Okay, then, well, thank you. I appreciate your interest and your efforts to make some dent on the lack of awareness of what's actually going on. Um, and even those of us who are well informed don't know.
See you soon, Paul. Take
Okay,
care.
man. All right. Goodbye.
Bye bye. Goodbye.